The morning of February 19th, 1945, broke clear and sharp over the volcanic rock of Iwo Jima. The surf boiled with landing craft, Higgins boats grinding toward shore under the covering thunder of naval guns. From the deck of an LST, Private First Class Jack Turner of the 5th Marine Division stared across a sea cluttered with steel. 450 ships stretched horizon to horizon, so many that even seasoned sailors muttered in awe. To Turner, a Kansas farm boy turned rifleman, it seemed the whole of America had floated to this speck of rock. When the ramps dropped, Marines surged forward, sinking to their ankles in black volcanic ash. It wasn't sand at all, more like powdered coal, clinging to boots, filling canteens, coating rifle bolts. Men cursed as they tried to run, each step like wading in coffee grounds. Overhead, carrier planes roared in neat formations, dropping ordnance by the ton. Yet for all this power, the beaches looked strangely silent. No screaming banzai charges, no defenders in sight. The Japanese waited underground, 21,000 soldiers hidden in 11 miles of tunnels, rifles and mortars aimed in silence. Turner gripped his M1 Garand, the weapon that would define the war, semi-automatic, 8 rounds in a clip, cycling faster than anything the enemy carried. When the fire finally came, it came all at once. Mortars plunging, machine guns raking, men dropping by the dozens. Turner slammed himself into the ash, heart pounding, knowing he had landed in hell. Yet even here, amid sulfur stench and cordite haze, something unthinkable waited. Not another ambush, but a revelation that would only be clear in time. Beneath the surface of the island, in a chamber cut from volcanic rock, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi composed what he knew would be his final message. Candlelight flickered against rough stone walls. The air was foul, thick with sweat and the sharp tang of unvented powder smoke. He dictated slowly, his voice carrying the weight of inevitability. We fight with empty hands and empty fists against an enemy of unimaginable material superiority. His plan had been unlike anything his superiors expected. No banzai charges, no suicidal waves. Instead, a defense in depth, let the Americans land, then bleed them yard by yard. With only 60% of standard ammunition delivered before the island was cut off, Kuribayashi knew his men would be starved of bullets before they were starved of food. Still, he had insisted that every Marine pay for every step forward. Above ground, the thunder of naval bombardment rattled dust from the beams. He knew his soldiers, armed with Type 99 Arisaka rifles, 5-round bolt actions already obsolete against the Americans' Garands, would fight to the last man. Yet he also knew what his men did not, that Japan's industry could not replace what was lost. In 1 month, American factories would build more aircraft than Japan could in a year. Against such abundance, courage was ashes. Kuribayashi signed the letter with steady hand, though his heart was heavy. He had resolved to die here, but what gnawed at him was the knowledge that his enemy's strength lay not only in weapons, but in a system that could endlessly produce them. He set his brush aside, knowing history would not remember this island as Japan's triumph. The first night ashore, Turner tore open his K-ration pack with shaking hands. Inside were the usual contents: a tin of processed cheese, biscuits hard enough to crack teeth, powdered coffee, and, most important to him, 4 cigarettes. Each meal box contained them. 3 meals meant 12 smokes a day, more if you traded. By the time the 5th Marine Division was fully landed, they carried more cigarettes on their backs than Kuribayashi's garrison would see in an entire year. Turner struck a match and inhaled. The taste was acrid, sharp, but calming. Around him, Marines crouched in foxholes they had hacked from the ash, cigarettes glowing like scattered fireflies across the dark slope of the beach. In the distance, the thunder of naval guns pounded the high ground, sending tremors through the sand. Those cigarettes were more than comfort. They were proof of supply, of abundance. Every ration crate unloaded from the beachhead represented a logistical system of staggering reach. Factories in North Carolina curing tobacco, rail lines carrying boxcars to California ports, Liberty ships steaming across the Pacific. A single division cigarette allotment was greater than some nations' entire wartime tobacco harvest. To the men who smoked them, they were simply part of life. To the enemy, they would become symbols of an impossible disparity. Turner exhaled, watching the smoke vanish into sulfur-scented wind. He didn't know that in days to come, those same cigarettes would be offered to enemies who had crawled from caves expecting execution. For now, he only knew they steadied his hands, and that they seemed as endless as the waves pounding the black sand. On March 16, 1945, Marines of the 5th Division moved cautiously across a blasted stretch of Iwo Jima. The island had officially been declared secure, yet pockets of resistance still lingered. From a shell hole reeking of sulfur and rotting flesh, a figure emerged, filthy, trembling, his uniform shredded by days underground. He clutched nothing now, though he had once held a grenade, resolved to die rather than face capture. The Marines raised their rifles, fingers tense on triggers. For a long moment no one spoke, the volcanic wind carrying only the distant thud of demolition charges sealing other caves. The prisoner staggered, sunken-eyed from 36 hours without food or water. In halting words, he asked for a cigarette. What followed was captured by an Associated Press photographer. A young Marine crouched beside the enemy soldier, offering a lucky strike. The match flared, casting shadows across faces lined with ash and fatigue. The Japanese soldier inhaled shakily, disbelief etched into every line of his face. He had been taught that surrender meant torture, that Americans were barbarians who scorned the weak. Instead, the first gift he received was tobacco, the same comfort his captors used to steady their own nerves. For the Marines, it was a casual act. Cigarettes came in every ration box. They lit them without thought, tossed packs into the dirt. For the prisoner, it was a revelation that cracked years of indoctrination. The smoke curled skyward, carrying with it the first whisper that Japan's war was already lost, not only in fire and steel, but in the simple fact of American abundance. Days later on Guam, a work detail of Japanese prisoners shuffled into place under the watchful eye of Marine guards. Their task was simple: clear brush, repair roads, haul crates. They labored willingly, almost cheerfully, because they knew what waited at the end of the day: food and the thin, paper-wrapped miracle of American cigarettes. Sergeant Hilar Moore, a combat veteran turned guard, would recall years later how the prisoners grinned when the smokes came out. They worked with a vigor born not of loyalty, but of astonishment. The Japanese loved the cigarettes, Moore said. They smoked them to the filter, then carefully unwrapped the paper, saving each stub to re-roll with scraps. What Americans considered disposable luxury became for them an emblem of survival. Here lay the chasm between enemies. Marines broke open K rations casually, discarding tins and sometimes even whole packs of smokes if they had extras. Japanese soldiers, raised in scarcity, treated every butt as treasure. Their Arisaka rifles were well made, but limited to 5 rounds at a time. Their rations had dwindled to half portions even before Iwo. Against Marines armed with Garands and supplied by a logistical empire, they stood no chance. Watching them puff gratefully on Lucky Strikes and Camels, Moore understood something deeper. The war had not only been decided by bombs and bullets, but by a system that could afford to share its comforts with its captives. The prisoners' surprise was genuine, and their gratitude unmistakable. For them, each cigarette confirmed what their commanders had whispered in despair: Japan could not match such abundance. One evening on Okinawa, a lone Japanese soldier emerged from a ravine, ragged and barefoot, clutching his rifle like a walking stick. His face was hollow with hunger. His eyes carried the fatalism of one who had resigned himself to die. He expected gunfire. He expected at best the quick death of a bullet, at worst the cruelty his officers had promised. Instead, he was met with something he could not comprehend. The Marines shouted, but not in rage. They cheered. Someone lobbed a piece of hard candy his way. Another tossed a pack of cigarettes. In disbelief, the soldier froze, then bent slowly to pick them up. His hand shook as he tore the wrapper, tasted sweetness he had not known in months. A Marine struck a match and held it out, the flame flickering in the Pacific dusk. It was not mercy alone that stunned him. It was the casual wastefulness of it all. Americans treated candy and cigarettes as trifles, tossing them about as though they were infinite. For this soldier, raised on scarcity, who had eaten grass and roots in the hills, the gesture was staggering. He realized in that moment that the propaganda had been lies. His enemy was not only merciful, but unimaginably wealthy in resources. Behind the Marines' laughter lay the machinery of an industrial democracy that could outproduce empires. Behind the prisoner's tears lay the recognition that his world had collapsed. The war, for him, ended not with a bayonet charge or a bullet, but with a piece of candy and the first draw of an American cigarette. While men bled on volcanic islands, far from the front, another battlefield roared to life. Detroit, March 1944. A single month saw more than 9,000 aircraft roll off American assembly lines. Workers in coveralls, many of them women, riveted fuselages and wired control panels beneath cavernous factory roofs. The scale was incomprehensible to those at the front. A single factory could outproduce an entire enemy nation. By war's end, the United States had built nearly 300,000 aircraft. In 1944 alone, more planes left American plants than Japan produced during the entire war. And it wasn't just aircraft. Tanks, rifles, artillery pieces, rations, all flowed in streams so vast they seemed inexhaustible. Where Japanese defenders rationed bullets, Americans carried them in bandoliers that never seemed to run dry. Where Japanese soldiers smoked scraps of leaf, Marines flicked away half-burned camels without a thought. This was the real weapon: industrial democracy. Factories in Kansas and California, farms in Iowa and Nebraska, shipyards in New York and Washington. Every Liberty ship launched, every Sherman tank delivered, was another hammer blow against Japan's shrinking capacity. The cigarette in a ration pack was as much a weapon of war as the Garand. It represented logistics that no empire could match. For men like Private Turner, these numbers were invisible. He only knew that when his rifle jammed, another would appear. When his ration ran out, more ships unloaded on the beach. For General Kuribayashi, deep in his tunnels, the numbers were all too clear. His men fought with empty hands and empty fists, while America fought with factories that never slept. By the third week of March, Iwo Jima was a furnace. Marines advanced yard by yard, clearing caves with satchel charges and flamethrowers. The most fearsome were the M4A3R3 Zippo tanks, Shermans fitted with flamethrowers that could spew burning fuel over 150 feet. The roar of their streams echoed through the tunnels, turning fortified chambers into infernos. Private Turner crouched behind a ridge as one of the Zippos belched flame into a hillside. The ground shook. The air filled with the sweet, sick stench of burning fuel and charred rock. Japanese soldiers who had sworn to die in their tunnels sometimes stumbled out screaming, only to collapse in the ash. Those who surrendered were rare. Fewer than 1 in 20 would live through the battle. The Marines paid dearly. Nearly 26,000 casualties, 6,800 dead in just over a month. Each step forward cost blood, yet the outcome was never in doubt. Behind the Marines stood the Pacific Fleet, behind the fleet stood the factories, and behind the factories stood a nation of 130 million citizens committed to victory. Kuribayashi's men fought with skill, courage, and fanatic resolve. But their 5-round Arisaka rifles, their dwindling grenades, could not stem the tide. American material superiority was measured not only in tanks and flamethrowers, but in the certainty that more ships, more guns, more men would always arrive. As Turner watched the flames die down, he pulled a cigarette from his ration pack. The smoke masked the stench for a moment. To him, it was habit. To any surviving Japanese soldier nearby, it was a symbol of a war already lost. Thousands of miles away, beyond the Pacific horizon, Japanese prisoners found themselves in an America they had been taught to despise. At Camp McCoy in Wisconsin, nearly 3,000 POWs endured winters colder than any they had known, yet they were fed 3 meals a day, clothed, and, most shockingly, issued cigarettes. At Honouliuli on Oahu, more than 4,000 POWs tended gardens and repaired fences under the Hawaiian sun, their guards often sharing smokes during breaks. For men who had starved on Pacific islands, the sight of American abundance was overwhelming. They saw trucks rolling endlessly, grain silos full to bursting, and tobacco fields that seemed inexhaustible. At home, their families rationed rice and salt. Here, in the heart of the enemy, even prisoners lived better than many civilians in Japan. Some tried to make sense of it. How could a nation so young, so distant, create such wealth in the midst of global war? The answer was visible in every direction: rail lines, highways, factories, farms, all parts of a democratic system that harnessed not just soldiers, but every citizen. When cigarettes were passed out, the POWs smoked them down to the paper. Some saved the stubs, rolling them into new makeshift cigarettes. Others simply marveled at the ease with which Americans treated tobacco as disposable. To them, each pack was more than comfort, it was confirmation. They had lost not only the battle but the foundation of the war. What began in a shell hole on Iwo Jima was repeated across camps in America. Astonishment that their enemy's generosity was rooted not in charity, but in abundance too great to comprehend. The island fell silent at last on March 26, 1945. The Japanese commander, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, was gone. His body never recovered, but his words endured. His final dispatch, written by candlelight in the tunnels, was read aloud in Tokyo. "We fight with empty hands and empty fists against an enemy of unimaginable material superiority. It was less a report than a confession." On Iwo Jima, nearly 21,000 defenders had been reduced to corpses in caves, their bones mingling with the black ash. Only about 1,000 surrendered alive, many too wounded to resist. In contrast, the Americans counted 26,000 casualties, 6,800 dead. Terrible losses, but sustainable. Even as the dead were carried to ships offshore, more divisions were already training, more rifles waiting in crates, more Liberty ships steaming across the Pacific. For Kuribayashi's men, the revelation had come too late. They had believed America soft, unprepared, unwilling to pay the price of island war. Yet they had seen Marines advance over open ground in volcanic fire, supplied with food, water, and yes, cigarettes, while they themselves rationed every bullet. To the general, the conclusion was clear. His soldiers' astonishment at a single cigarette was proof of the larger imbalance. What could not be killed by artillery or flamethrower was the industrial machine that delivered those cigarettes, those rifles, those ships. Kuribayashi had commanded warriors ready to die. His enemy commanded factories ready to produce without end. In the end, it was the cigarette in the prisoner's hand, not the bullet in the Marine's rifle, that best revealed the true nature of American victory. The numbers, when finally compiled, read like impossibilities. Between 1940 and 1945, American factories produced nearly 300,000 military aircraft. In March 1944 alone, production exceeded 9,000 planes. more than Japan could build in a year. A single plant at Willow Run, Michigan, turned out a B-24 bomber every 63 minutes. On the ground, millions of rifles flowed from Springfield Armory and Winchester, enough to arm entire nations. Cigarettes, almost invisible in their ubiquity, told the same story. A Marine division could burn through tens of thousands a day. American rations shipped across the Pacific contained more tobacco than Japan's entire military stockpile. What was leisure to the American rifleman was unimaginable luxury to his prisoner. For the Japanese, such statistics were demoralizing in a way artillery never could be. They fought bravely, but against a flood. Where one tank was destroyed, 2 more appeared. Where one ship went down, 5 more steamed out of San Francisco Bay. Even waste became a weapon. The Americans could discard more than the Japanese could ever hope to possess. Historians would later call it the arsenal of democracy. Veterans knew it simply as reality. The cigarette was not a miracle, but a byproduct of an economy that dwarfed empires. When passed into the hands of a prisoner, it carried all the weight of a nation's capacity to wage total war and to extend mercy at the same time. The famous photograph survives, a Marine crouched beside a Japanese prisoner, cupping a match in the sulfur wind, smoke curling upward as both men breathe in silence. It is not as iconic as the flag on Suribachi, yet it tells a truth just as profound. The Japanese soldier, gaunt and exhausted, received in that cigarette not merely relief, but revelation. The propaganda that had promised torture collapsed in a single draw of American tobacco. His captors were not only merciful but inexhaustibly supplied. To him, the cigarette was evidence that the war was unwinnable. To the Marine, it was simply another lucky strike from another ration box. From that ash-colored island to POW camps in Wisconsin and Hawaii, the pattern repeated. Prisoners discovered that even in defeat, America's abundance extended to them. Cigarettes, candy, hot meals, tokens of a system that could afford generosity because its capacity was limitless. Looking back, the cigarette becomes more than smoke. It is a thread connecting the frontline Marine to Detroit factories, to Iowa farms, to Liberty ships in San Francisco Bay. It embodies the staggering truth. America could fight with fire and steel, suffer losses that would break other nations, and still light a cigarette for its enemy. As the last embers faded on Iwo Jima, the meaning was clear. America's strength lay not only in its weapons but in its abundance, its ability to share even in war. In that small gesture, history caught its breath. The cigarette in the ashes was the quiet signature of victory.